Hey, what's going on out there? I'm Sean Devine. Hope you all are doing well. Today's video, I'm going to give you a walkthrough of the production, mixing, and mastering session for a new song I released recently. It's called Only One. And some of you have heard this in a few of the tutorials that I had done here recently, and had a request from quite a few of you just to walk you through and show you how this was put together, talk about some of the processing and just the methods and approach to getting this thing done. So I'm gonna go ahead and play it back, and then we'll start breaking things down. We'll start with the beat elements there, and then move on to the vocals, the verse, the hook, different plugins, and then finally we will get to the mastering processing that I did on this, which is a little different. Got a couple plugins you guys might not be as familiar with. So hopefully you'll get some inspiration out of this for your own sessions. You know the one I trust the most is up above me, but while we down here, who really loves me? Lost contact with a lot of friends. I've been out of favor with a lot of tens. Perfect looks don't make you vibe with me. Matter of fact, what's in your heart, we'll see. Conversations left me feeling empty. Yeah. Flying so free, truth spoken so silently. I look deep into your eyes, and I realize this pain. You're the only one that take it all away. Could take it all away. One chance, one glance as I look into your eyes. Let's start with the beat here. I had this really washy guitar sound that was occupying just way too much space, but I like the feel of it. So if I take the EQ off of it, it's probably going to sound really, really overwhelming. Yeah, so cool sound, but there's just so much low mids in that. So yeah, I cut a lot of stuff here below, about 400, and then I cut off a lot of top end, so we just get the mids, and that sounds like this. So yeah, we still get the vibe of it, but I'm just cleaning up a bunch of space for the 808 and all the other things that are in this track. That guitar chord sound, it just had way too much there. And that's the case with, some of these sounds that you all are using as producers. You don't want to use something that sounds really, really cool, but you're not going to be able to kind of build the rest of the mix around. So immediately just cleared out a bunch of space. So we'll talk about the 808. This is something that I processed with a sidechain, of course, but I utilized the F6 so that we can dynamically EQ it with the sidechain. So I've just got the kick down here. Let's play those back together. So you can just see as our kick's coming through, I'm attenuating at 40 and 70, just so that the kick and the 808, really are kind of married, just picking the right sample there. Same thing with the kick. The kick, I know I did some subtle EQ to this. So just rolling off a little bit below 20, nothing really crazy. A little bit of 200, and then we've got to roll off up in the high end. I think there was just some crunch. Yeah, just very little there. Also had smack attack on it. Let's see what that did here. So just a little bit of a snap on the front end. The snare sound was just really important to me. Given the vibe of this record, I wanted it to have, this big kind of reverb on the snare, but not be, overwhelming. So if I solo this. Okay, so without the reverb, just like this really small kind of tinny snare. But that reverb is the Space Designer, which is just a stock reverb in Logic. But I really like this plugin because it's got some great impulse responses that are included. And this is one of my favorites. It's the drum plate. And so it's it's less than a second decay on this. And for whatever reason, it just fit the snare perfectly. I just loved the way it fit in the groove. So yeah, we'll talk about that snap that I layered there in a minute. But some of you might be kind of surprised that I had RVox on here, which it's designed for vocals, but it's the same thing. We're just doing some compression. So it's really just more body than anything. Just kind of brings up some of the low mids there. And then finally, I'm using F6, which I used F6 a lot in this mix just because there was a lot of buildup in various elements, and dynamic EQs are kind of my new favorite thing just as far as controlling problematic frequencies rather than just reaching for, a standard EQ. So with this, I think that we've got, yeah. So I just did a little bit of a reduction at about 800. There was just something kind of funny with the snare sample. And then I just rolled off some low end. So then we've got this snap that ran this to the same reverb. Yeah, so that layered with the snare. Pretty vibey. Now, I want to talk about this little pad drone. This is one of those things that the way that I mixed it, it's really, really far back in the mix. It's kind of subtly panned, and you wouldn't necessarily notice it on the first listen. So it's just kind of back here. You can hear it in the intro. So it's literally just a chord that just is playing that same note throughout. But again, the way that it's blended, it just sort of adds a little bit of a texture, and it also plays off of those guitar chords. So when we're mixing, a lot of times people just have this mindset that everything needs to be clearly heard and upfront. And if you can't hear it, then you mixed it wrong. Certain things need to play supporting roles and just add texture. It doesn't necessarily have to be, this really upfront element, but that plays well off of the guitar chords as well. If there's opportunities to mix something like that where the listener is going to catch that on like the third or fourth listen, those are the things that I, as a listener, really appreciate that when an engineer does that, just kind of tucks that in, or it's a production and a mixing choice. So let's talk about the intro. Again, something really subtle that you might not pick up on the first time around. I did a field recording many years ago of cicadas, and I actually use this in a lot of different things. But I mixed that with that pad drone that you just heard, and we get this. So the glitchy kind of effect, obviously I bounced this to audio just because, again, since I was doing everything in the same session, had to kind of be aware of my resources. But I'm pretty sure that I used Stutter Edit. They released an update, and this is a really cool plugin to just do these kind of crazy sorts of effects. Let's just put the Stutter Edit on maybe that pad and just see if we can kind of replicate whatever I did. Yeah, anyway, you get the idea. You could just do some gnarly sorts of micro edits and timing edits there. And so that's what I did on that pad for the intro with the cicadas. So let's talk about this little female Vox sample, which goes throughout most of the beat.
Wow. Wow.
But if I take off the reverb and the EQ there,
Wow.
and the reverb that I have is the chroma verb, I just really like this space that I dialed in with the vocal hall. It's got about a 5-second decay, and then just panned it to the left, which I usually don't do panning of something like this unless I have something to kind of balance it with on the other side, because it tends to stick out. But I did have this, lower in the mix, and I actually thought about, taking this out or not having it happen as often. But the more I played it back, like every time I hear that at the beginning of the bar, it just had this like kind of hypnotic sort of effect to it. And so I just left it in. I thought it was slightly distracting, but in a good way. So I just left it as is. This vocal synth that happens only in the hook, and this is kind of the catchy element here. Yeah, so let's see what that was. I think I chopped up some kind of vocal phrase. Yeah, so that was the original sound. And I just did something really fast, EQ'd it, added that same vocal hall preset from Chroma Verb. You're the only one to take it all the way. Yeah. You could take it all the way. One chance, one glance as I. It's got this kind of percussive, playful sort of feel to it that I just felt like kind of played off the vocal. So yeah, that's pretty much the main elements of the beat. I did do a little bit of automation. Let me see if I can just pull up the automation lane. I want to say I did maybe a little bit of a filter sweep. Yeah, so if you pull up this EQ in the second verse, we talk about, kind of dipping in, some kind of filter sweep for the beat just to create movement in the arrangement, which is what I did here. You could take it all the way. One chance, one glance as I look into your eyes, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, no time to debate it. Woke up this morning, my feet to the floor and the darkness is faded, and it comes back around. Yeah, so just using automation to, turn off the bypass, and then just kind of sweeping this back and forth with the highs there just to create some movement. But yeah, that's the beat. So let's get to the vocals. Let's talk about what's happening just on the main vocal chain. We'll start there. Obviously, used a lot of waves tune. And if you guys want to see the setting I had here, just set the scale accordingly. Pretty fast speed. I kept going back and forth on the pitch correction for this song because part of me didn't want to correct it so much because it is pretty heavily corrected. And not only did I do waves tune, but I also did it in combination with a flex pitch on certain parts. And some days my pitch is just worse than others. And granted, I'm not a great singer anyway, but for this particular day, I just remember being a little pitchy, more pitchy than usual, but I like the performance of it. So I just corrected it, pretty heavily, but you guys are kind of used to hearing me on, the pitch correction. So I speak from my heart and we did it since the start. Let's see what the main vocal chain is. I'll just solo it for you guys. You know the one I trust the most is up above me, but while we down here, who really loves me? Lost. And then I had some harmonies back here, and I think that they're on a similar chain. Yeah, I just added a little bit of reverb to kind of create a separation with these. Let's hear what those are. Lost contact with a lot of friends. Yeah, so they're pretty much the same chain, but we've got F6 doing some pretty heavy cuts. And the reason for this is this microphone, I use this for my tutorials. And so for that reason, a lot of times it's just the one set up. And if I'm doing my own vocals, sometimes I'm just too lazy to go back and do the booth thing and keep running back and forth. So this mic's set up and it's not really even made for these type of vocals. It's made for broadcast, like this sort of thing, radio, and it has a lot of mid frequencies that just build up. And of course, it's affecting it dynamically. So if I just turn that off, lost contact with a lot of friends. I've been out of favor. Not bad. Lost contact with a lot of friends. I've been out of favor. But that just kind of opens it up more, especially once I start layering it. It's just easier to do that. We got the SSL channel, signature, crazy aggressive divine boost on the SSL channel. I love my high frequency boosts on that thing. We've got RVox, we got a de-esser, and a limiter. And this is based off of a preset in Divine Mixing Vocal Chains V3, I think. Yeah. So it's this preset called Hip Tune Pro. And I would just use the Studio Rack one, but I have all of my channel strip settings saved here in Logic. And I just pulled it up very quickly and I used that to track with. And then, yeah, other than the F6, which I added just because I was using this mic, that's the preset that I used on the actual track. So a lot of you ask, if you use a certain preset in some of those packs and elsewhere for tracking, can you just leave them for the mix? Absolutely. If they sound right, if it ends up working for what you're doing, then, just doctor a few things. If you need to adjust some things on the EQ or whatever, you can just leave it. Let's go to the hook. Same vocal chain as the verse. However, I'm sure I used a different reverb. Yes. So we'll talk about that. But I also used a little bit different sort of dynamic EQ. So if we pull up, this is the verse. Let's see what the hook looks like. Yeah, so very different cuts here. The hook's going to be stacked a lot more. I had more harmonies. And so, if you do that, just realize that you've got to create some space for those voices to work together. And I don't like to have a ton of separation with those as far as like the core tone. I want them to kind of sound like one voice. Let's see. For the reverb, it's just Valhalla. And let's just solo it so you can hear this. I look deep into your eyes and I realize this pain. You're the only one that take it all the way. So it's a big reverb, but the way that I'm keeping it somewhat, controlled in the mix. I look deep into your eyes and I realize this pain is trusty R compressor. I like to sidechain my reverbs with the vocal. So I'm just sending all those hook auxes to this compressor. So it'll compress that reverb, keep it out of the way whenever the vocals are coming through. And then the delay on there is Valhalla delay. Automated the throw on that. So if we just solo that. I look deep into your eyes and I realize this pain. You're the only one that take it all the way. Moving on to verse 2, I did have some backing layers for this, and you guys asked me, how many times should I record my verse layers and stack them? And I think it just depends on the performance. It depends on the beat. Like with this beat, especially in this part right here where we cut off a lot of that stuff with an EQ, I don't need to have a ton of layers for that. So if I just solo the main layer. Seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, no time to debate it. Woke up this morning, my feet to the floor and the darkness is faded. That's already a pretty full tone that I don't need to stack that a whole bunch. But I had one backing layer. Seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, no time to debate it. And you can hear that tuning going on because, it just wasn't as tight that day. But in the context of the mix, like you can't even hear that. Seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, no time to debate it. Woke up this morning, my feet to the floor and the darkness is faded. It comes back around like the hope I found. And same thing with the harmonies. Like the hope I found. Will you hold me down? A lot of you ask about my harmonies and like what plugin I'm using to generate them. I've showed you guys that you can generate harmonies, out of just the regular sung thing. But for me, I sing them. I'm pretty efficient when it comes to finding harmonies. It's something that's come naturally to me. I guess just having a production background, I just sort of know what the harmony needs to be. And so I sing them and then just tune them with Waves Tune the same way. So it's nothing, special trickery in terms of a plugin. It's just singing the harmonies, like actually singing the harmony.
From who we were meant to be, you keep on reminding me who I was back then. Came a long way from back in the day, and that's a win. And if I got you by my side, then I could do it all again.
So I had this kind of flangey thing that's just very quick, sort of a filler, but I thought it sounded really cool with meta flanger.
Yeah. Ain't no slave to sin. You know it. Before I folded, pushing me to keep going. Now they quoting what we wrote into your eyes. And I realized.
So let's go ahead and get to the mastering, which there's some interesting stuff here. First of all, I did master this track with my SSL Fusion. However, the way that I wire things for my tutorials, it is not routed right now. So it's disabled, but I utilized the vintage drive section as well as the Violet EQ. So what I did, just for the sake of example, so that you guys could hear it closer to what the actual master is I just used the X saturator to kind of take the place of the vintage drive section. And then I did a boost in the high end to kind of get closer to what I did with the Violet EQ.
No slave to sin. You know it. Before I folded, pushing me to keep going. Now they quoting what we wrote into your eyes. And I realize this pain. You're the only one that take it all away. You could take it all away.
So it might sound subtle to you all, but just adding some nice harmonics brings the mix up just a little bit and makes it a little bit more heated, if you will. And then going to this EQ, it just added that nice top end mastering kind of top end there. And the XEQ is a mastering grade EQ for sure.
Ain't no slave to sin. You know it. Before I folded, pushing me to keep going. Now they quoting what we wrote into your eyes. And I realize this pain. You're the only one that take it all up.
Yeah, so that thing really takes the blanket off the top end. Very nice there. The Pro Q3, I just rolled off some extreme lows on the mix. A lot of times when I get to the mastering, I just don't want a bunch of stuff below 20. Sometimes I'll just leave it be as long as it's not causing issues or I don't feel like it's taken away from some of the headroom to get to the maximizer. But for this one, I had just a really low 808 and that kick going, and I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't too much happening below 20. But then just very subtle dynamic cuts. I've got one at 300, one at 1K, 1800, 3K. So again, these are just subtle cuts. Once again, controlling some of the buildup in the vocals. There's just a lot of low mids and mids in this track with that guitar going. Just all those washy kind of elements, big reverbs. Then I have a dynamic shelf here that's just controlling the extreme high end above about 12K. And you'll see that it's just subtly attenuating and cuts some of that really nasty, like dog whistle sort of high end.
Eyes, and I realize take it all away. You could take it all away. One chance, one glance as I look into your eyes.
It's not doing anything super crazy, but just keeping that under control and taming it a little bit. Now, moving on to this plugin, which is one that I haven't showed you guys yet, but I just tried this on this particular master, and it's called Soothe, and it's a really cool dynamic processor that does just that. It kind of soothes whatever you put it on, whether it's a vocal or a master bus. It will just actively sort of monitor problematic frequencies and just give you a smoother sound overall. So if I bypass this, let's go over here.
You know the one I trust the most is up above me. But while we down here, who really loves me?
You can see in real time all this very subtle attenuation happening. And there's some algorithms going on behind here. This is very much AI type stuff where they've studied kind of ideal curves and things and frequencies that are just not as audibly pleasing. And it will just kind of actively control that. Now we can control it with a soft depth or a hard depth. And if we go hard, which I experimented with this and you can get carried away with it. So if we did this,
you know the one I trust the most is up above me. But while we down here, who really?
So obviously, I mean, doing that's extreme, but you can hear that you start attenuating things in a way that just doesn't sound pleasing. But if we just do it, soft and then bring it in slowly.
You know the one I trust the most is up above me. But while we down here, who really loves me? Lost.
Even that with the depth all the way up, it doesn't sound bad. Like it's hard to get bad results with this plugin. It just kind of does a pleasing thing that once you turn it on, you don't want to turn it off. But yeah, for this track, I didn't want to tame things that much. It started sounding a little too analog for me, maybe too much tape. But if we bring it back, we just get that subtle tape sound that's just going to tame some of those harsh frequencies.
You know the one I trust the most is up above me. But while we down here, who really loves me? Lost contact with a lot of friends. I've been out of favor.
Yeah, so again, it's like when I engage it, it just sounds a little bit smoother to me. And it's one of those things that once it was on there, I was like, I'm cool with that. I don't want to take it off. So left it there. And then we've got Ozone, of course, trusty Ozone. Not doing a ton in this session. We had the imager, and I'm just widening a little bit of this stuff in the mids, high mids, and then the top end. Let's hear what that sounds like without it.
You know the one I trust the most is up above me. But while we down here, who really loves me? Lost contact with a lot of friends. I've been out of favor.
Very subtle. Maximizer, we got about 4 dB on the threshold. I delivered this at 0 true peak, and I'm actually finding that the result of that versus whenever I've been delivering at like -1 true peak, when I monitored it, it didn't do what I thought it was going to do. So again, I'm going to get back to y'all on that. I don't want to speculate too much, but just as long as you're staying below 0 true peak, again, the conversion to a lossy format, you're going to introduce some difference, but I just am finding that extra dB as far as true peak, the way that I'm mixing, might not necessarily be a bad thing to retain and then, have a little bit of a difference in terms of that encoding. But anyway, just something I'm experimenting with. I'll keep you guys posted on that. I want to just point out that this session is not overly complicated. You can see my channel strips. Again, I just based these off of some of my Divine Mixing vocal presets. Like there's not that much needed there in terms of processing. And it's because I'm maximizing the resourcefulness and efficiency of the plugin. So it's like, for example, using, this dynamic EQ rather than using, an initial channel strip with a high pass and then following that with multi-band compression and then doing all these other things to do what I could do here with one plugin and do it very effectively. So, some of you have sent sessions recently asking me for, tips and advice, and you've got channel strips with like 10 or 15 plugins on them, sometimes 20 plugins. I literally just saw that recently, and there's no right or wrong way to do this stuff. But as you can see, you don't need that much to get a good sound. And all you're going to do by adding that much processing is just convolute your session, lock up your CPU, and it's not really going to, achieve any more as far as the sound as you can do with these few plugins that are used correctly. So just keep that in mind. If you have any questions about what we covered in the session, feel free to leave a comment below. If you learn anything in the video, please like, subscribe, and consider sharing. We'll talk to you soon.
You know the one I trust the most is up above me. But while we down here, who really loves me? Lost contact with a lot of friends. I've been out of